Welcome back to the Radical Moderate podcast. This is part 2 of my interview with Judge Robert Herzfeld. And in the first part of our interview, we really got into the decades-long experience you have in the criminal justice system, and you really just kept coming back to the mental health aspect. And I want to take a deeper dive on that. How specific can you be with either individuals or particular kinds of mental health? Like where do you see the problem originating at, and then go into like what can we do about it? Give me some hope here that we're not just spinning our wheels and we're just going to always have the highest incarceration rate in the world.
Well, as we kind of were wrapping up, I'm glad you brought it back to this. I have a lot of hope. I know things are better than even when I started as a judge just 16, 17 years ago. I know they're better. And I have a sense that that's not because of me. I mean, I individually, I do what I can to make it better for people. But the biggest thing, two things really that have made the system and the ability for the system to help people better in the last couple of decades. Number one, and I cannot emphasize this enough, and that is the introduction of new medications that make it easier for people to get their medication and get those doses in the correct way. And they're called LAIs, or long-acting injections, and it's a shot that can, depending on what the medication is, it will last a month or even as long as 6 months, where the folks who otherwise would be having to take 1 or 2 or 10, not 10, but 1 or 2 or a bunch of pills per day, even when they're depressed, even when they don't feel like it, even when they're in a manic state and they're having to remember all these different things, they have to take that medication or they're going to lose parts of themselves along the way. But with the long-acting injectables, that takes that out of the equation. I take an allergy pill and an asthma medicine every night. I don't take it every night because I forget, and I'm among the higher end of people who take care of themselves and take care of their business. And so imagine if you miss one pill and it's going to affect your ability to take your next pill, it's going to go on down. And so these long-acting injectables are a game changer. And they're only really being prescribed. They're beginning to be prescribed at levels that are going to have a broader impact on the population. So that is one. And the other thing is that more people have access to insurance that covers mental health treatment. And that's whether that's medication or therapy. About 12, 13 years ago, there was a law passed that said you cannot keep somebody from having health insurance because of a pre-existing condition. So but that was just 13 years or so ago, which meant until 2011 or 2012, if you had bipolar and you couldn't change insurance. If you had schizophrenia or your family member had schizophrenia and you're trying to get them covered, you could not get health insurance, which means only the really wealthy could get the best care. And that has been a tremendous change where people have more consistent and steady and stable care combined with access to really life-changing medications. And we're now seeing the benefit of that. And that's why I have hope, because those medications and the ability to access those medications, we're still not yet to a saturation level. Some doctors, particularly, older doctors, are less inclined to do those longer lasting medications. But the benefits have been astounding in making it where people have the ability to live their life and be their best self and be their best, friend and family member, husband, daughter, whatever. And that it is astonishing. And the more people that come into contact with somebody or have somebody like that in their life they're aware of this as an option, the more people can have that opportunity to be successful and to have hope, not just for society, but for their friend or family member and for themselves, and having the opportunity to help them.
I think everybody's heard the expression, this person was off their meds. And so you're saying that their medicine is advanced to a point where we can help stop that. Now, going back to how this interacts with the criminal justice system. So somebody comes in, gets arrested, they're ending up in your court, another judge's court. I mean, you sound like you're pretty knowledgeable about these things. I wonder, are all judges that knowledgeable? Like from a process and system standpoint, how are people screened, and like what happens from a broader perspective to make sure that the judicial official can say, yeah, you know what we really got going on here is a mental health issue. Let's treat that first.
Well, it is more complicated than that. I will say most judges who've been doing it very long all judges that I've ever met want to do a good job. Okay. They want to do the right thing. They may not have, 16 or 17 years of experience or particular interest in that field, but we judges, we are fortunate. There's not every judge is a great judge, but almost all judges are pretty good. So that's good, but it's not as simple as a judge sees it. There's somebody coming in that's being prosecuted. There's a limited ability to interact and get into it at that stage, or maybe any stage from the judge's perspective when it's a criminal case. Certainly, you can order a mental evaluation to see whether they're competent to stand trial, to effectively assist in their own defense, or whether they, at the time the crime was committed or allegedly committed, whether they were able to appreciate the criminality of their actions. Those are the two basic things that judges would be involved in relatively early on, typically in a criminal case. There is not, and I'm not sure that I'm advocating for the ability to, but there is not the ability for a judge to just say, stop, hold on, you shouldn't be doing this. Okay, this guy or this lady is having an episode, we can fix it. Like that's not a part of our system. You can conceive of a system where that might work, but that's so far away from what we do that it's not really worth jumping into, certainly head first. The prosecutors being aware of that and having the guts to tell victims that this is not a case where we need to lock them up. That is a hard thing to do, especially if you're an elected prosecutor, as we are in Arkansas. But there are prosecutors who do that, who have the experience and also the compassion for victims to explain and see what's going on. But all of that has to be measured by accountability, or not measured, but tempered by accountability. So it is an extraordinarily complicated process. But most people want to do the right thing. Most people comprehend that if somebody thinks that they're being attacked by demons, that it's maybe not their fault that they pushed over somebody in the grocery store, right? And so obviously the more serious the injury or the damage, if somebody is killed, that makes it much more difficult to say, well, not that, and I'm not even sure we should say, we just need to treat them. That's a very complicated process. But the short of it is, life is really complicated, and people who think there's a simple solution to anything that we've been struggling with, they're either naive or they're lying to you. But there are ways we can't continue to do this. Yeah.
And I don't know that maybe there isn't a simple, probably not a simple solution, but what I'm just wondering, maybe even if it's after adjudication, they did, as you well know, a lot of times people start in the criminal justice system in a, theft or some drugs or just disturbances in a home. And like, it's not felony. And sometimes the police don't even arrest them initially, but it's starting to get out of control. And I don't know where, because the police have so much to do already. I don't know where you're supposed to find that help, but maybe it's post adjudication. And we haven't talked about drug courts. And you've definitely made a distinguished here, but I know there are drug courts. And so they try to have more of a process. If you could give us a minute or two on just what is it that the drug courts are trying to do, and to what extent do you see them nationwide as being successful?
What a drug court there are differences across every single drug court is different than every other drug court, at least a little bit. But generally speaking, it's court supervised intensive treatment with accountability for and frequent drug testing. I think that's probably a relatively straightforward definition. So you would have somebody who has had multiple previous convictions where they were low level, they never went to prison, and then drug court might be their last opportunity to stay out of prison and to get help. And if they use, typically there is a punishment for that, but also a treatment response. And so if they use, they go to jail for the weekend, and then they may need to go eventually or immediately to an inpatient facility for 20 days or 28 days. And then let them get out. They're required to work. They're required to do, it's a lot. Being a drug court participant is very busy and very complicated. And they do work really well for a particular kind of defendant. Generally speaking, those who have the most family support and most structure, where that's going to maintain after the fact. Okay. And so the more they are a part of the community, the more likely they are to take these lessons and continue to be able to apply them. Where we don't do so well with drug courts is they've done well, maybe had a few times they got in trouble, but they stopped once the accountability came into play, that we haven't been able to change their desires and also haven't been able to create for them or have them create the structure of support that they need once the judge is no longer looking over their shoulder. So that's a complicated problem that there's not an easy solution to. And there are also mental health courts that do similar things, and there's a number of different kinds of those. But I do want to come back to what you were talking about.
Well, if you want, just before we move on, one thing that you said there that did strike me, that's much harder than say mental health versus drug courts. You can give a person a drug test and immediate clarity, you're either on drugs or you're not, and you can have consequences for that, where I'm assuming mental health ebbs and flows, or you meet them when they're on their medicine, you don't know that there's a problem. You meet them when they're off their medicine, there's clearly a problem. So we'll put the drug addiction to the side, but I do think there's such a personal level here that maybe you've got some examples of, and I want to get into. And by that, I mean, I know people who've either had some mental health challenges, and it didn't necessarily turn into criminal, but it turned into a mess for everyone around them, and sometimes criminal. And then I also differently know some people I've worked for me, that sort of thing. Drugs became an issue that they couldn't overcome, and it wrecked lives. So, but you're about to make a point. So go on with that.
Yeah. So we were talking a while ago about the stage when they come before the judge, and then as I said, the judge really has limited ability to do much there. And then you talked about doing something after adjudication, which absolutely we can, and we should do a better job of that. But where the rubber meets the road would be before they're arrested, but they're engaging in obviously disturbing behaviors, right? And so in Arkansas, under Governor Hutchinson, the legislature, and he signed it into law, passed into law what are called the funding for and structure, somewhat of the structure for what are called crisis centers. And those are designed for these kind of folks that come into contact with patrol officers or sheriff deputies. Obviously, they're not doing well. Often they'll have a family member, even they themselves will say, I'm on my meds, or I'm having a crisis. And what do we do with those folks who are not okay and not safe? Well, you have to put them somewhere. And what we have for most communities, that means you're going to jail because there's a problem and it's not safe for you to be where you are. And if you're lucky and you have a prosecutor's office that is set up for it, and you have facilities that are set up for it, as we do here in Saline County because of our, the history of having facilities here, you might be able to get a civil commitment and have prompt action and have a bed available. And so those are the options. What the crisis centers that were funded by Governor Hutchinson have begun to do is have somewhere that's effectively a combination of those two things. So someone can be picked up, they have an encounter with law enforcement because of this because of their behavior. You take them to the crisis center, they get an immediate evaluation, they begin to get treatment, they get somebody who's going to look into their background and at least stabilize the situation. Almost all of these folks are going to have a psychiatrist or some therapist or some treatment already. And then you connect the dots, help them get back situated, and you move on, and they never come into the criminal justice system. So that's one of the reasons I have hope, because again, that's a Republican Arkansas, Republican governor, Republican legislature passed that, and and they are in place. The opportunity is moving forward. There's only two of them, and there's one in Jonesboro area, and there's one in Fort Smith, and there was three. There was one in Pulaski County as a regional crisis center, and that is no longer functioning. So the good news is somebody came up with the idea, and it's a really good idea, and it's being implemented. And the opportunity in front of us is to see and measure and demonstrate how effective that can be, and have the guts and the willpower to put money behind it, where people all across the state or all across the country, wherever you're talking about, have that type of way of, stopping things before they go so far where you're having to lock them up because they've hurt somebody or they've caused such incredible property damage, and you're securing them, you're getting them help, and you're heading them off at the pass. And that's where we have a real opportunity, because it's there and we'll be able to demonstrate that. It's just going to take knowledge among policymakers and legislators that this works. So, and here are the results. And I have been doing mental health issues in court in Central Arkansas for 22 years or more altogether. We've never been able to use one of those, but we also are lucky to have our own local facilities where it's similar to, but not exactly the same. But that's where I have hope.
It definitely sounds.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, it just definitely sounds like an effort to do something different when things haven't been working. And what's the actual name of these centers again? What are they called?
I believe they're called regional crisis centers, and you can Google it for Arkansas, and you'll see where it lists three of them, and then it shows you the map where it's two of them on either side of the state. Obviously, I think the nicest way to say it is that they're effectively pilot programs now. And the biggest lift, and one of a value that I see is places and outlets like your podcast is sharing information about, because it does make sense, right? I can see you're listening and you're responding. Well, and of course it makes sense. Like, how do we save all of this money and time here at this? It's a way to cut them, as I said earlier, to cut them off at the pass. And so it just takes spreading the information, and hopefully, over time, the results will speak for themselves, and we'll spend that $1 here to save the $5 later.
Yeah, it sounds great. You educated me. I had not heard about this, and maybe I've become out of touch on such things. All right, I'm gonna throw you a curveball. I'm gonna give you a kind of hypothetical, what I call pretty radical approach to things that popped into my brain here, and just give me some feedback on it. Indulge me. So the way I've talked about this before, which is the first time anyone has to go to a jail. And I can say that the only times I've ever been to a jail was as a licensed attorney to meet with clients. I never arrested. I'll be honest, in my younger days, there's probably times where I had too much to drink. And had I been stopped, I probably would have gotten a DWI, and I should have. I was engaging in bad behavior, and that's on me. And thank God nothing happened. But, I was able to move past that. But so here's my view of the county jail. A person spends their first night there, and when they walk out in the morning, depending upon what happened to get them there, I think it's a big moment in their life. And that is a moment where they're either saying, hey, the behavior which led me to be in this awful, stinky, scary place, I got to stop. I can't ever come back here. Some people, and I think the kind of people you're talking about with mental health, they might view it either they don't even know they're there, or maybe they're going to get some medication. Maybe something good is going to happen because of it. There's people, and you've seen them, who they grew up in a home without stability, without discipline, without resources. And they're like, I got a place to sleep and they're feeding me, and I think everybody reacts differently. I really think there's an opportunity to do more at the county jail level and just say, in exit interview, why are you here? And do that screening there. And maybe it's drugs or mental health or whatever. That's my radical approach. And it just popped in my head because you kind of inspired me with all your hope. So now knock me down a peg. Knock me down a peg. Would it work? Am I crazy?
It is a part of the way you're supposed to do drug courts is to do an exit interview. And it's kind of obviously a good idea to get more information. The difficulty, and certainly not insurmountable. The difficulty is we have in Arkansas, for example. Obviously, other people from around the country have, probably related issues. There's 75 counties, which means there's 75 county jails, which are operated by 75 different sheriffs who have a widely varying level of funding and staff and the capability of hiring qualified staff. There's well, I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm confident that there's jails in Arkansas that can hold less than 20 people, right? And then you contrast that with jails. Yeah, I mean probably less than 10, but you might have 3 jailers that are watching 5 or 6 people. I mean, that at most sometimes 3 jailers, right? And so getting the funding for, that's an outside, having a sheriff that would do that would be, I'm sure there are sheriffs out there like that. There are lots of innovative sheriffs, but that's not where the drive is likely to come. So that you're talking about a study, a university funded or government state funded study where with actual one-on-one interviews, but then also following up just to check on recidivism, to see whatever things that may have been arrested. Yeah, really a longitudinal study of why people are in the county jail probably has been attempted, but not to my knowledge. I'm sure it's out there, but it's a brilliant way to gather information. Again, it takes funding, and somebody needs to be in charge of it that has stakes in it.
I think you could start, you're talking about pilot programs. I think you could start at some bigger jurisdictions, in Arkansas, there'd be Pulaski County, but I'm thinking Cook County, Chicago, maybe, I don't really talk about billionaires on my show much, but why not some billionaire drop $50 million on something like this? Because if the government does it, everybody's going to say it's a terrible use of money. I just think, going back to what I said in part 1 of our episode, I think we have a problem with incarceration. Now, I'm not saying I know every aspect of why that's happening. You've talked in great detail about mental health being a huge factor in the system. You've got some solutions for that. I just think we need to get more aggressive and try some pilots. And I'm encouraged by these crisis centers. Do you happen to know, by the way, why one of them closed in Central Arkansas?
I'm aware that it closed. The website effective that I saw when I was double checking today. Basically, I think it was UAMS that was administering it, and I don't have any inside information whatsoever on that. But it appeared that there was perhaps disagreements or some difficulties with the funding being consistent and with policies being consistent, which is, not shocking that might occur in a new type of policy approach and as it's being applied. So, it's the beginning of what I believe can be what it's going to take is somebody or a lot of somebody's with skin in the game who understands it enough to talk about it and to take action and educate the different levels. So even if you have a center, if the sheriff's office or the sheriff deputies in that area don't know about it or don't believe in it or think it's just a hug a thug or whatever, then it's not going to work. So we need cross-sectional buy-in. And so that's where leaders come into play, whether it's a governor or a member of Congress or a local state legislator. These people can lift up the awareness and speak one-on-one and to groups about how this is valuable. And it doesn't take much to convince people on this kind of issue, I think. But you've got to have, there's not an institutional structure that is self-sustaining. So unless somebody at the state level or there's a grant, even if there's just a grant throwing money in, it's not it. You got to have people who are invested and involved. And that's the heavy lifting, but at least somebody's gotten the pry bar under the rock to start moving things.
By the way, is hug a thug a thing that the kids say, or where'd you get that?
It's often a derogatory term on treating the individual rather than punishing them. Yeah, I've been around cops and lawyers and judges for a long time, and it's the kind of thing people say that just sounds like a hug a thug program. But which is anyway, yes, I don't like the phrase because I like it because it doesn't work, and it's obviously doesn't work.
Yeah, no, I didn't know where you got it from, but I'm sure it exemplifies the challenge of no one wants to be seen as soft on crime, coddling criminals, but and I certainly don't, but the costs of this, just the hard costs, the costs of incarceration and the costs of law enforcement, all the police we have to pay for, that alone, I think justifies what we need is more innovation. So here's what I like to do. We just got a couple minutes left. You've touched on this a couple times. I feel like you got more to say on it. On a personal level, meaning you've seen people come through your courts, and I know you couldn't use names, but you might have a specific story of a family and you saw it was really a mental health situation. Do you have any success stories? Can you end us on a good note of saying, yeah, this happened, and go for it?
When I first took the bench and was handling these kind of cases, I'll try to keep it tight, but there's several different layers or levels of the civil commitment. So one of them, the first one is generally a 7-day evaluation. Then you have a 45-day order. Then you have a 180-day commitment where they're getting longer term treatment. And unfortunately, often those are rolled over with multiple hearings over years. The number of people who are, for lack of a better term, frequent flyers, like that would come in for a commitment, they need a 7-day evaluation. We get them stabilized, get on their meds, and then they come back in 2 months when they go off their meds again. I don't see that anymore. Okay. I don't see it anymore. Mostly, I believe, in my experience, based on the research and things that I've done, but mostly because of the long-acting injectables that we were talking about a while ago. They get steady treatment. There's downside. There are downsides to those shots. One is that they're shots. So there are some people who are not going to want a shot of any kind ever. But there are also, for the medications themselves, there are side effects. However, if they're on the medication at all, it's effective with the same side effects. And so they need to be on the medication, but not having to take it every day consistently and having that long, steady ability to not just be well, but also to stay well and to have the structures and support and develop the relationships, to have the resilience to just go once a month or even every 2 months to get that shot. It's made a world of difference in my experience. And it's a miracle. It's something that it changes, not, as I said several times, not just that person's life, but all of the lives of the people that are around them. It makes the world a better place, and it gives all of us
You might have turned me around a little bit toward the end of the episode here with the LAIs. And I think I'll close by saying that I bet there's families out there, I hope there are anyways, that are hearing this podcast. They've had a situation, and maybe it hasn't gotten to a criminal level, but they've got a brother or a cousin, a friend who's been going down the wrong path. And maybe they didn't know that this was a newer thing. And maybe they can, as they get involved talking to doctors and such, they can bring awareness to this, because you called it a miracle, and I've known of you and your reputation long enough to know that you wouldn't use that term lightly. So thank you, Judge, for coming on the show today. It's been very informative, and leave the audience with some things to think about. And so for this week, that is the POV of POB.